I'm Big Don Luca, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren.
What is up, guys?
We are back on the mic to discuss the Mavericks. Obviously, it has been pretty thin in terms of news the last couple of days. The Mavericks obviously traveled back from their 17,000-mile entourage overseas, and they came back, and they had 2 days of practice, I believe, since they've gotten back. They've had some other days where they had some optional workouts and what have you, but there have been some injuries. They are still bearing, some unfortunate luck here as we continue on in preseason. And, through all that as well, the Mavericks also still have one more preseason game tomorrow, or no, not tomorrow rather, but Friday on October 20th versus the Detroit Pistons. It's been a sort of hectic whirlwind for the Mavericks coming back here to Dallas, but they're also we haven't really had much to analyze either because they haven't been playing any games or anything. So what have you sort of gathered from this last week or so as far as the Mavericks are concerned, Jaren?
Yeah, I mean, as far as roster movement goes, I feel like this was kind of similar movement as what we saw last year, where I can't remember who exactly it was, but I feel like we signed a guy and waived him just a few minutes later. And he was basically just a strict Texas Legends guy. That's kind of what we saw with Tajay Moore. I know we'll probably discuss more of that later. But as far as injuries go, I mean, it really is bad luck. Just recently, yesterday, actually, Jaden Hardy and Josh Green came on with the injury meal. I can't remember, was Jaden Hardy's a sprained ankle, and then Josh Green, he fell on his back.
Fell on his back, yes.
Yeah, so I'm hoping those guys are ready. Maybe not for the last preseason game, but at least for the 25th, which would be in a week from today. But as far as Luka and Kyrie goes, it seems like Kyrie's fully back. I think Luka is going to be held out entirely for that last preseason matchup. But I do know that there is some growing optimism that he will play in that first season game or that first season opener. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's just been kind of at least the last few days, it's been sort of subjective news, nothing too serious other than some injuries here and there. But outside of that, some roster movements that I guess, kind of surprising in a way, or at least surprising for some fans that maybe haven't watched preseason. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, I think it's pretty kind of routine stuff as far as coming to an end in training camp and preseason kind of goes.
Yeah, we're going to get into a few of those roster moves, not just Tajay Moore. There were a couple other moves, some minute changes that the Mavericks made around the margins that we'll get into, here at the start of the podcast after the ad break. And we'll also, obviously be getting into the main topic of today, which is going to be who are the, sort of swing factors and breakout guys for the Mavericks, and then who are the wild cards this season for Dallas, because, we wanted to get a little bit of a, sort of preview pod out with their, kind of being thin on news, but, we'll be right back to the grind with Friday preseason game versus Detroit with a post-game pod for you guys. So stay tuned for that, of course. But we'll go ahead and get into the bulk of this episode. But before we do that, here's an ad from our sponsor, Spotify for Podcasters. All right, Jaren. So getting into it, some of these tidbits of news that have sort of came out over the last week or so since the Mavericks have got back to Dallas after their preseason trip. First of all, they did indeed end up waiving Mike Miles Jr. He did not even appear in one preseason game. Obviously, he had a pretty decent summer league for the Mavericks. Playing guard right next there to Jelly Walker, especially in those last few games, he really found his rhythm attacking the rim. But it seems like that chapter has came to a close. Obviously, it was pronounced that he was out due to a illness in the first preseason game in Abu Dhabi versus the Timberwolves, and we really had no sort of status updates on him after that. We'll get into the other guys in a second, but did you have anything on him, especially since the Mavericks signed him to a two-way and kind of just blew him off so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is real unfortunate, and it kind of just shows the business side of basketball. Because I mean, like I said, it is unfortunate because he really didn't get an opportunity to play at all. I think had he had that opportunity, he probably would still be on this roster, at least right now. But look, that nothing is guaranteed in this business. We see that right now with what just happened to Mike Miles Jr. But I would be surprised if he's not in some way, shape, or form, unless if he gets another two-way contract somewhere else. I would be surprised if he's not on a Texas Legends roster, or at least at one point in time it was some sort of affiliate with the Legends or just something along the lines of that. I would be very surprised if that's the case. I think Dallas kind of wants to keep him under wraps a little bit, but like I said, if there's another two-way contract out there, I hope for his sake that he goes and takes it. Because again, that's how you keep an NBA career alive. So I hope that if that opportunity does arise, he does take it.
Yeah. Do you think that we can attribute the Mavericks waiving him so early to their inability maybe to consolidate some of their guards elsewhere in the offseason? Because I saw like a couple of people bring this up on Twitter that, because the Mavericks are guaranteed that two-way contract to Mike Miles essentially like almost right after the draft. And, maybe they had, just had in their plans that they were going to be able to move on from Tim Hardaway Jr. They, may have coveted a guard at that two-way spot a little bit more back then. So, I mean, do you think that could have played a factor into any of it?
Yeah, I mean, we won't know for sure until maybe some presumed deal comes out 2 years later about how a Tim Hardaway package almost accumulated and never did. I mean, we just simply won't know that. But at least in my eyes, I think it was, and I do realize that the Mavericks did have another two-way spot open. But I think that, with the rise of Dexter Dennis and how well he's played, I think that that's more of a position of need, at least for the Mavericks right now. But definitely, if the Mavericks had something set up or, I think especially whenever you look back at the signing of Seth Curry, like that definitely could play a part in that, being that they probably wanted to get off Tim Hardaway Jr. in that process. So we won't know the answers to that. I could definitely see why there is speculation towards that. But look, I think it is unfortunate, as I said before. And, I'm glad it opened up a spot for Dexter Dennis. I think he's probably the right, or at least the better fit in my eyes. I don't, we can't really judge too much just because we never saw Mike Miles play at all. But, in my eyes, I think Dexter Dennis was at least the right choice.
Yeah. And obviously the Mavericks still haven't officially signed Dexter Dennis to a two-way contract. There have been rumors and there have been some pretty heavy hints that they are going to move in that direction, but there has been nothing official on that front. The Mavericks also, of course, waived Jordan, Jelly Walker, and Joe Wieskamp. Obviously, Jelly Walker, played more of a prominent role in the organization. He was really out there hooping the last couple games in Summer League, just like Miles Jr. And honestly, didn't look too bad in spot minutes in preseason, but, granted that it is preseason, especially, being an end of the bench guy, none of these guys are, going to get more than, those fringe, 10-ish minutes there at the end of the game. So they have to make the most of the opportunities. And I do think that obviously with the Mavericks, sort of logjam at guard, that definitely, played into account and to those waivings, especially with probably Dennis looking better than Wieskamp. That's probably the reason that, Joe Wieskamp got waived. But obviously the Mavericks were able to accrue all of the returning player rights for both Walker and Wieskamp and Tajay Moore, who they all waived. I do not know about Mike Miles or if that's just completely terminated, if he's going to try to get a two-way contract elsewhere. We'll obviously find more out about that, I'm sure, soon. But that's really all that happened in terms of roster moves that the Mavericks were making around the margins here since they got back. And barring that, we just have that unfortunate injury news. But obviously, if we want to delve a little bit deeper into that, Kyrie Irving was a full participant in Mavericks practice on Tuesday. So that's obviously, really positive news. It seems like he's completely back healthy and ready to go. It seems like he likely at least will get some minutes in that, dress rehearsal versus Detroit, unless the Mavericks are, going to be overtly cautious. And, if they are, I won't blame them as long as he's healthy at the end of the day and ready to go. on the regular season, I have no complaints personally. As Jaren talked about in the intro, Luka is still dealing with that left calf strain. All signs are pointing towards him, being prepared. He's been on the elliptical bike. You can see it even on his IG stories. He's up there on the day off trying to get his training in. So, per Mark Stein and some other inside sources, seems like Luka is going to be good to go by the beginning of the regular season, but it's obviously not definitive or anything like that. So we'll just have to see how that goes, because he's obviously going to be taking it easy, and the Mavericks are going to push him to take it easy the next few days, and obviously have him sit out this last game. But I think where more people are concerned than anything, because the injuries to Doncic and Irving, were both known commodities. Obviously, we all knew that coming out of that trip, but both the first and second day of practice, Josh Green with that back injury, Jaden Hardy with the sprained ankle. Jason Kidd did say, or at least the sort of tone in which he unveiled in the post-practice interviews yesterday, did seem like both of the injuries weren't serious, but they are pretty close, obviously, to the start of the regular season, and obviously very close to this game versus Detroit. So what is your concern level with those two injuries?
Yeah, I think I'm more so concerned about that sprained ankle. I know that that's an injury that, at least in years past, I don't know about Jane Hardy, but at least in years past, has held out former Mavericks for a little bit longer than a week to 2 weeks. And so to me, at least that's the most concerning part of that. But yeah, I mean, that back thing, I don't know if it's a contusion. I don't know if it's a bruise or something like that. I really don't know the details of that back injury, but it is semi concerning knowing that, we are so close to the season, and not just that, but we're also close to this last dress rehearsal versus the Detroit Pistons. And I think it's a very valuable game for especially those two guys. And Josh Green more in particular. I know that his role has kind of been on that fringe starting spot. I don't think that there's any confirmation yet for that number 3 spot. So I think for him more so, it's important to play that last game. But look, we won't know anything indefinite. At least we haven't got any updates since that Tuesday presser. I think Jason Kidd was in it. Yeah, he was in that Tuesday presser. So yeah, that was really the last details that we got. I don't really know when we'll get any more details. But yeah, I mean, being that it's so close to the season, it is a little concerning, considering that those are our two promising guys. I know we'll probably touch up on both those with with our sort of topic that we're going to discuss. But yeah, I mean, those are both guys that I feel like are pretty important to the season, especially Josh Green.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think we're just obviously happy at this stage that none of the injuries have been anything more than minor. But obviously we really don't have any confirmation. And with Hardy's thing, anytime that there's ligaments involved, that's obviously a little bit more concerning. We don't necessarily know the degree to which he sprained his ankle. So that's, I think, probably the biggest area of concern coming out of all this. And, if that does happen, maybe, if it gets announced that Hardy might be out for a month or two, for instance, do we see the Mavericks, change their direction in terms of maybe getting another guard in the two-way? Like, you never know how these things could affect the moves that the Mavericks make, around the margins. Obviously, we're pretty close to the start of the regular season. I doubt, unless anything, crazy sort of materialized after a last minute James Harden fallout trade, it doesn't really seem like the Mavericks are going to be making any more moves here. Barring, like I said, those maybe moves around the margins with some two-way guys and stuff like that. You want to sort of build a staple of continuity at this stage in training camp, and go full-fledged into the season with the group you have, obviously. So it's going to be interesting to see when the roster is completely locked and loaded in. But hopefully these injuries are just as minor as they seem, because as long as everybody's healthy at the start of the regular season, hopefully all this just is a redundant sort of arc in training camp. But it obviously does suck from a continuity perspective, trying to get some decent practices in with your full personnel ahead of the season actually starting. And that the Mavericks have all obviously been troubled with that, from personnel perspective all preseason and training camp. And, it's typically a time where most teams really don't have too many health issues whatsoever. And, you look comparatively across the league, most teams aren't really dealing with like 4 injuries, really at a time. So obviously it is unfortunate from that perspective, but, all we can do is hope for the best going forward. And, we're just lucky it's not too major. But, getting into the actual bulk of the podcast here, we're going to be diagnosing the, most potential breakout players for the Mavericks this season, as well as the guys that, could be huge ceiling raisers for the Mavericks and really swing the tide of their season if things go right. And then we're also going to be talking about some wild card guys on this roster that we think their season could, go one of two ways. Maybe they end up having a really good season where they perform ahead of expectations, but there's also signs, whether it be reflective of their past play or something of that nature, that they obviously may have a worse season than expected for the Mavericks. So we're just gonna be going ahead and getting straight into that, obviously. So Jaren, in terms of a breakout / ceiling raiser guy, who are you going to start us off with?
With the breakout player, I want to say Derek Lively, but I'm gonna go with Jaden Hardy. I think Hardy is the type guy that if he does play well, if he does play at a high caliber level, he can definitely raise the ceiling of this team. Really, I don't think he's going to be a starter at any point this season. So as far as starting lineup goes, I think he's probably going to sit pretty well on that bench. But as far as a guard off the bench, whether it's Dante Exum or him, I think that he's probably going to be the guy. At least that's going to get the bulk of the scoring. And I think that if he can score at an efficient level, maybe not like we saw in preseason, or at least the last few preseason games, we should definitely see a breakout season. I like so far what we've seen from him. We've seen kind of a maybe not a new level of scoring, but just kind of a different level, or at least he's being more creative in a sense. Like he's getting his spots. He's getting to the second level much easier than he was in his rookie season. And not just that, but with the minutes that he had with Luka last season, we obviously saw that 3-point shot rise dramatically. And I think that if he can continue that, and of course continue, really his dribbling, shot making, creating, all of those, sort of levels and facets of the game, if he can increase upon that and improve upon that in the season, that's a guy to me that I look at as a prime breakout target and also a prime ceiling raiser, because you're not really expecting much out of him this season, or at least we haven't up until really the last few preseason games. But if he is going to do something, it would of course be semi soon. And I think especially with Seth Curry and everything, like they're going to be battling for minutes. I wouldn't be surprised to see him make it out of that race. And not just that, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him dominate that race, because Seth Curry, look, I love him, and I think that he's obviously good in his own rights, but as far as minutes go, there's only going to be one of those guys that kind of gets that 15 to 20 minute range, maybe depending on a matchup, whatever it is. But I think Jaden Hardy's going to be, in my opinion, a prime guy to be that quote unquote breakout target.
It's interesting. I'm going to go with a little bit, I guess, of a hot take here, probably among Mavs fans, but I'd honestly put him more in the wild card category if it was me, because he has obviously took a little bit of a step as a playmaker in terms of what we've seen from the summer league and preseason so far. Hardy has impressed me with his handle and his ability to get to the rim, but he has had some efficiency woes in terms of his shooting. He definitely hasn't been consistent as he was at the tail end of last year. Obviously, it's an extremely small sample size, so I'm not here to overreact and, go with the agenda that he's not going to play good this year, not have a breakout season. But I do think it is a little bit more up in the air that he could be dealing with some sophomore slumps this year. So I'm going to go ahead and put him in the wild card category, but I could honestly see him, going either way. And I don't think that even if he does have a down year, I don't think it's going to be something that throws off the whole trajectory of his development or his career. But I could see maybe his shooting or something of that nature, taking a little bit of a hit as he tries to develop other areas of his game even furthermore. But, I do think that he's going to be an integral part of the rotation regardless. Like he's going to have to play and play at a decent level. So If he somehow starts playing bad enough to, where he is out of the rotation, that's a whole other discussion. I'm not necessarily alluding to that, but I could definitely see him kind of not regressing, but staying, in a similar sort of realm as he was last year. So we'll just have to see how that goes. But moving on, I guess, with my next guy that I'll pick for a breakout season, I'm gonna go ahead and run with Dante Exum. This is probably the cliche answer among most Mavericks fans right now. He obviously has had a really good preseason so far. He's really been able to, push the tempo in transition. He's been a great, pester as an off-ball defender, and he's been really switchable as a one-on-one defender. He's brought over all these sort of intangibles that people have talked about in his overseas play the last couple years. Playing in Euro League and I believe the Turkish League, if I'm correct. He's really maybe in the Germany League, to be honest. I can't remember. But yeah, you may need to.
I think
remember
I do know that
Partizan Belgrade, right?
I know that they're a Serbian team, so I don't know if that'd be Serbian or Turkish.
Wow.
I'm not sure like where they play exactly, but
Okay.
I know it's a Serbian team.
Yeah. But anyhow, he obviously has looked really good in preseason so far, really polished. He looks a lot more under control as a player. He isn't second guessing himself as much in terms of trying to get to the rim and using his athleticism and his handle to get there. He's made some spot up threes, which has been really encouraging. That's obviously going to be something that he's going to have to continue to prove to be consistent upon, because I don't know if he ever shot above maybe 32% in his NBA career at any juncture throughout his 6 or 7 years or whatever that he played, maybe 5 even. I don't know how much he played off the top of my head, but the way he's been playing early on in preseason, being able to essentially guard 1 through 3 at a very high level, and also being able to run pick and roll. He's really good at using his athleticism to just force 2 defenders, and he's just in the same sort of sense as Josh Green. It's not really, he doesn't kick out to shooters as much, but he's able to find guys in the pick and roll, and by contorting his body to make some really hard passes. So he's been very impressive early on, and I think that he will be a pretty big part of the rotation if he continues to play at this level. But we obviously could be preemptive. There's only been 3 preseason games, so who knows? But that was my second guy.
Yeah, I mean, at least through everything that I have seen through, of course, 3 preseason games, I mean, heck, I think he's making a run for that 6-man position. I don't know if that's a hot take or what, but I think Tim Hardaway is obviously the standout guy for that position. But Dante Exum is, of course, making a run for his money in that. I like what he's done, whether it's playmaking, defensively, of course, everything that you mentioned. He's also controlled the pace extremely well. He's pushed the pace at times. I think one of the things that he touched up on, at least on media day, that he learned in his time in EuroLeague was, just how really to play, I guess, just the tempo of basketball, at least overseas. And I think that he's kind of brought that maturity and also brought that, knowledge to the NBA, at least through what we've seen. And I'm really surprised with what we've seen. I have not seen really any bad moments from him, at least that I can think of off the top of my head. Even, if it's a missed 3-point shot, it's always a well-taken 3-point shot. I believe he's like 2 for 4 or 3 for 5, something like that, and shots taken over so far. We'll see, of course, as he plays Detroit. I believe I'm assuming like everybody's going to suit up besides Luka, of course, and any other of the hurt guys. But yeah, I mean, I've really liked what I've seen. I think that he's going to be a really key guy, and I like that he's a breakout candidate in your list. He would be in mine, but of course you already took him. So I think that being that he has such an important position off the bench, I think that he's just primed to be that breakout candidate, and especially because of his past. I think he's just had such a I guess disappointing past in the NBA that that's like sort of what lives up to the what do you call it, I can't think of the name on it, but he sort of like is just primed for that. So that's why I like it. I guess I'll go with my second guy real quick. We'll probably go with another guard. And you can even argue that he already had a breakout season, but we'll go with Josh Green here. I think really everything that we've seen from Josh Green, pushing the pace, even making his usual flashy passes, and scoring the ball, his jumper, as we've talked about ad nauseum, has looked extremely well. There really is no sort of knacks you can make on it. It's super fluid. And yeah, I mean, I haven't seen him miss like a really bad shot yet. And I think that says a lot because, you know, we really, not that we were used to seeing him take bad shots at any point in his career, but there was times where his jumper looked a little bit questionable. And I think that so far, an offseason, or really 2 years of that, has proved him, you know, some benefit. So I really like what we've seen out of him so far. I'm hoping that he can play in this final preseason game because, again, as I mentioned before, it's going to be a key game for him if he really wants to secure or lock in that starting spot. I think, in my eyes, he's that starting guy, that number 3 starting guy. But yeah, I mean, I think everything that he's done defensively, of course, and of course on offense, has just looked like a starting level small forward in my eyes. And I think that he's going to pair next to Luka and pair next to Kyrie, as we saw him do last season.
Yeah, no. In the same sort of vein as Jaden Hardy, I honestly am going to take the same route here with Josh Green. And it's really not for anything necessarily that is in his control. If we're talking, you know, purely from the standpoint of how I think he's going to perform this season, I would definitely, you know, go ahead and put him in that, you know, ceiling raiser category. Because I do think, you know, his summer with the Australian national team was excellent. His jump shot even looks more fluid and quicker, as you alluded to. And I do think that, you know, he's poised to even take a bigger step offensively if he gets that role. But there's obviously, you know, the sort of, I guess, growing sense, you know, within the Mavericks organization, as it seems, you know, we've heard a little bit from Mark Stein, is that, you know, we don't even know who's going to be starting at that, you know, that last, you know, starting lineup spot that's kind of up in the air. Obviously, we have Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic, Grant Williams, and essentially Derek Lively, second confirmed to start at this point. But, you know, with that last spot, there's, you know, been a growing sense that Derek Jones Jr. may be able to get it, potentially even Exum. And I don't, you know, I think Josh is, you know, in his limited minutes where he's been, you know, tasked with having to create offense for himself in preseason, he's looked really good. And I think in all other facets of the game, he has looked really good in preseason. But, you know, as with everybody on the roster, he has had pretty limited opportunities. And my only sort of fear in any of this is the October 23rd deadline for his contract extension. If the Mavericks aren't able to, you know, come to an extension on that, and the two sides end up, you know, taking the qualifying offer, and, you know, then we sort of run into this, you know, growing speculation of when is Josh Green going to get traded because he's going to become a restricted free agent, or I don't even know, or would he become an unrestricted free agent because he took the qualifying? Yeah,
I think it would be unrestricted now that you
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So, I mean, just seeing how that situation would play out, I that's my only hesitancy to label him right off the bat, you know, as a guy that's going to be in that ceiling raiser category. But, you know, once his future is secure and locked in Dallas, I think that, you know, without a doubt, I would put him in that category. But, you know, we have 5 days till we'll find out for sure, you know, exactly how that's going to go, or I guess it's October 18th. Yeah. So 5 days. So, you know, we'll obviously just have to see how all of that plays out. But I do think that, you know, I guess if we're, you know, technically speaking, I think whether it's with the Mavericks or another team, I think Josh Green will indeed have a breakout season in year 4. But the whole situation with his role being somewhat up in the air after, you know, I think he proved enough last season as the incumbent starter, you know, even if he did have a little bit of a down stretch after that injury, you know, after the All-Star break area when Kyrie got there. I do think that he proved enough, and he still looked good enough in preseason to maintain his starting role, you know, especially what he can add to the offense as a cutter at his age. And, you know, even furthermore defensively, he even took a bigger step this summer with the Australian national team in terms of taking a bigger role defensively. You know, I do think that would just be truly invaluable. So, you know, he's my personal choice to start, but as we approach this deadline, it is getting a little bit weirder that a deal has not got done yet. I'm still confident that, you know, the two sides will come to an agreement. There hasn't been anything really denoting that they won't. But like I said, we're just going to have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to your point about that contract, it is a little scary that he could become an unrestricted free agent at the end of this contract if he is to not sign. But look, I think, everything that we've seen, everything that we've been told has kind of been otherwise. The two sides maybe aren't, on, 100% online together, but I think a deal is pretty much, it's pretty much imminent. And I think a deal will likely be worked out, hopefully here in the next few days. Hopefully it's not exactly on the 23rd. But similar to Maxi, we saw that deal get worked out previous to last year's start of the season. I think we could see something similar with Josh Green.
Yeah, so moving on to our next guy, there aren't, too many guys that I want to put in this breakout category because, I do think that, like I said, that there has to be at least a somewhat decent reason, behind that in terms of, the sort of growing sense of how good these guys have played in preseason, or, if they've had a good summer. That's why I'm, just being so meticulous with who I'm putting on this list. If we really wanted to, I guess we could say like Luka and Kyrie, because they're obviously going to, play good and hopefully even beyond expectations. But to, assume that they're going to play above expectations is a while, it's kind of wild in itself because they're already so good. So, I don't want to throw that upon them on my rankings. But I guess lastly, if you want to get into, one more guy, I know you and I kind of agreed on him before the podcast in terms of the guy that we both had in our list, and that is Derek Jones Jr. And regardless if he starts or comes off the bench, I think that that's definitely going to be dependent on how effective his three-point shooting is. But, he's been in the NBA for 8 years, but he came out really early right out of UNLV. I think he was only like 18. He's only 26 and doesn't turn 27 until I believe like February 15th. So, I mean, he's still a pretty young guy. He's still uber athletic. He's already shown, his ability to, affect the game, from a rebounding, from a cutting perspective, obviously from, defensive perspective, he's essentially done all the little things, within his few preseason games that the Mavericks just didn't have last year from the wing position. They just didn't really have a lot of dimensionality. And his athleticism has definitely been a breath of fresh air, to say the least. Obviously, Josh Green's really athletic, but, there just really wasn't a guy off the bench or, another guy that could do any of those sort of things. And I mean, Derek Jones Jr., former slam dunk champion, he's obviously, he can jump out of the gym. But, what I've been more impressed by, like I said, was, his ability to fill in within, the sort of intricacies of the game. He's just a really savvy player overall. You can tell his love for basketball if you listen to like any, of his sort of interviews at media day. And, he just does a lot of the little stuff in terms of, always, filling the right role, making the right cut, things of that nature. So I've obviously really been impressed with him thus far. The Mavericks, have some offensive actions that they can run in terms of, some backdoor lobs with him out there. And, if his 3-point shooting comes into fruition, then he can be really effective. But regardless, even if it doesn't, he's still going to be a guy that, can be serviceable as a cutter and in the short roll. And he's going to find his way to get a few points every game, just off of, sheer athleticism alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said. I think, I do agree with you that, just sort of what he gives you on the court can, ultimately just open up the offense by itself. His athleticism, his, knowledge of the game, his ability to cut, read the defense, do all these things, honestly expands your offense so much. And I think that the Mavericks, once they fully tap into that, are going to open up a lot more, offensive actions for him, and also, work off ball for Luka, Kyrie, whoever it is. I think that they're going to get a lot more actions with Derek Jones Jr. in that lineup. But even defensively, I really liked what I've seen. He's of course a lengthy defender, a guy that is going to give you pretty much all the effort in the world. I think from what we've seen so far. Of course, he's a high flyer. He's going to do everything in his power to attract those backdoor cuts, attract those sort of 45 cuts, whatever it is, and catch that lob pass. I think that we've already seen that expanded on with his game in Real Madrid. But so far, I think that he's a prime breakout candidate. Maybe not anything that we're going to see, like his 3-point numbers might not jump out from I think his traditional 34% to like 39%. I don't think we'll see a breakout like that or a jump like that. But just in terms of his production and just in terms of what he does on the court, I could very well see a breakout season coming our way for himself and also just for the team in general. I think that he's a guy almost in the wild card sort of view, but I think that he's a guy that can change the tide of what this season could potentially be.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And the only reason I even put him in the breakout category is because even if he doesn't shoot, good from three, and he kind of is the same player that he was with Chicago last year, it's still definitely a wing that the Mavericks need, off the bench. And like you said, to highlight some of those, what he's going to be able to do for them defensively, being able to switch 1 through 3. He's very quick footed. He's shown that he can be a great defender in all facets so far in preseason. Obviously, he'll struggle a little bit, kind of getting pushed around. He's a lanky guy, sort of lengthy guy. Definitely could add a little bit more muscle to his frame. So, he's still young-ish, so it'll be intriguing to see if he ever does that at any, part throughout his career. But, as currently stands, he can still, defend 1 through 3 pretty effective. So he'll definitely, he'll definitely be helpful for the Mavericks this year, whether it's off the bench or starting. So that'll obviously kind of just depend on how good he ends up shooting from 3 and, is how expansive his offensive game is, like we talked about. But moving on into a couple more wild card guys before we're going to go ahead and wrap this one off. We first got Richaun Holmes, Jaren. We kind of both agreed on most of the wild card guys before we even started the podcast. So with Richaun Holmes, what is your reasoning for him being a sort of wild card guy, even though he's had a rough start to the preseason, to say the least?
Yeah, I mean, at least so far, as long as we look at that sort of center position, Dwight Powell, we've seen how I'm going to label it as horrible. We've seen how horrible he has played through 3 preseason games. Not to say that Richaun Holmes has played any better, but I think that he's a guy that is primed to at least take that next step, take that number 2 spot. I'm not saying he's going to be a starter. I think Derek Lively is a pretty much guaranteed starter, at least in my eyes. But Holmes, might have a potential opportunity to become that number 2, especially if DP, continues on this sort of downward trek. We could very well see him take that leap. And yeah, I mean, I think that he's definitely a guy that, if the Mavericks, let's say this, if Holmes has a sort of 2020-esque season, or maybe not even on that lines, but remotely that close to that. I don't know if he'll start necessarily, but he could very well be a guy that you look at as a lethal guy off the bench. Maybe even in a playoff series, you use him off the bench as one of those top 8 rotational guys. So I think he's a guy in my eyes that sort of dictates almost the trajectory of this team. He's not going to come in there every night, at least from what we've seen. He's not going to come in there every night and be the most productive guy. But pretty much as a wild card in the definition of it, he's gonna dictate, or maybe not dictate, but he's gonna come in there every few nights and change the course of a game. And I think that Richaun Holmes is pretty much he's that kind of guy. At least, I mean, it sucks to say that we have Dwight Powell and Richaun Holmes as their like secondary center, but that's the world that we live in today. And I think Richaun Holmes, of course, is the better of the two. And that right alone, I think he's going to get that wild card spot for me. I know, Will, you'll probably touch up a little bit more on it, but that's my reasoning for it.
Yeah, no, obviously if he does end up having a resurgence to, return to form with how he was, playing in Sacramento before, those sort of false accusations came out and he had sort of that legality trouble. And then, his role was kind of thrown to the garbage after some injuries and Sabonis getting traded there. I mean, obviously if he can return to form from that perspective, I mean, yes, he's, he may even start over Lively, depending on how everything plays out. But that's, by no means a guarantee. And he's looked pretty rough in preseason so far, barring a couple good minutes in the first game. So, how he plays defensively, if he can be serviceable on that end and, be effective in the short roll, and be a good rebounder on the other end, that's obviously going to be huge. He's been a guy that's, had really good, points per possession in the pick and roll throughout the course of his career. And he's going to have to being that, he's going to have to get back to being that dynamic big offensively at the very least if he wants to, see consistent minutes. Because even right now, I'd say maybe even Dwight Powell's honestly played a little bit better in preseason, but, both of them have played, pretty bad to say the least, having started off here. So, that's going to be interesting to monitor. But to your point, Jaren, even if Lively does start, he's still not going to maybe be a 30 minutes a game guy. Still probably going to operate in that 20 25 minutes a game. The Mavericks are still going to need backup rim protection, and I think the reason that Holmes is so pivotal, the reason that he's such a big wild card, is because how he plays. If he's going to be serviceable defensively, that's going to dictate a lot of the Mavericks rim protection throughout the course of the game. Between him and Powell. Because when you have Lively in there, at least you have a threat. He's obviously going to make some rookie mistakes, but you at least have a very imposing figure in front of you. But with the other two guys, it's definitely going to be up to their effort and how savvy they are and how defensively aware they are on that side of the ball. Moving on to a couple more wild card guys. I don't think we really have any more guys in terms of the ceiling raiser category. Starting off, I think the biggest wild card that almost any Mavericks fan can probably agree, amongst the consensus, I would say is Derek Lively is second, because obviously, he has essentially been delegated this role where he is going to be the starter, even though, he may not be, from a developmental perspective ready for that. But at the same time, he might be, because all the reports coming out of Mavericks training camp, have been so overtly positive. They've said that he's made so much strides in terms of his ability to pick up defensive coverages, and his screen setting, stuff like that. But we'll have to see that translate to the court. There have been some very promising plays from him in preseason, within the pick and roll, and just in terms of establishing himself as a rim protector. He's a big threat out there, and he has a lot of athleticism to be able to get after shots. Sometimes he can be out of position. He's may not be in the right place where he needs to come up and protect a shot. But when he is in the right position, more often than not, he does not get scored on. Unless it's a strength factor, like we saw with Gobert in that Minnesota game, where he just literally wasn't strong enough to be able to contain him in the post. So I think he how he plays and the trajectory of his play, whether he improves throughout the season, will obviously be a huge factor for how good the Mavericks can be, because it's not really as much on offense, but defensively it's gonna matter insurmountably in terms of how his play is reflective honestly upon some of these Mavericks wins or losses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like what you said. He's really quite literally going to be like the biggest X factor on this team, and in doing so, it's going to make him a wild card. I think that everything at heart is probably everything is right. I think that he's probably the best starting caliber center that we have on this roster. I think he's the best defensive center that we have on this roster. So, like in that sense, I like Lively starting, but at the same time, he's a rookie. We have seen his rookie moments already, just through 3 games already, and it's been a little bit of an eyesore, and it will continue to be that way. But he has also had some very good moments. He's some very high flying moments with the sort of lobs that he catches. But I will say this, like he's a guy that is going to get better every game. I mentioned this before in the podcast, but he's going to be a guy that gets better every game. We've already seen that just really since the beginning of training camp and summer league and everything like that. He's progressed so much already. But still, is that going to be worthy of a starting caliber spot? That has yet to be seen. We don't know if that's going to be yanked maybe 5 games into the season. We don't know yet. But as we've seen, he's kind of the best guy at that center position, and I think he deserves that starting spot. But yeah, I mean, I think a wild card is probably the best description for him, because again, I think that this sort of how Derek Lively does, being that the Mavericks seem so committed to him, is really going to dictate how the Maverick season goes. If he goes poorly, and we see all the rookie moments happen, he's just unable to read defenses. His strength isn't up to par for those starting centers. He's just getting bullied in and out from even mediocre centers. We could very well see a pretty lackluster season like we saw last year. But again, if he shifts the tide, if he, I guess, plays better than expectations, then we could very well see him sort of change the course of the Mavericks. It just we have yet to see it on both ends of the spectrum, so we'll see. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a little nerve-wracking to say that we have a starting center or a rookie starting at the center position who's going to be so vital to this season's success. being that this is such a key season, not just for the Dallas Mavericks, but for Luka Doncic. What's going to happen with his career? It kind of, I don't want to say it like falls on Derek Lively's shoulder, but I think a huge part of it could end up being how Lively plays is, what sort of the talking point at the end of the season. So, we have yet to see it. Of course, we're just not entering the season, but yeah, to me, he's probably the biggest wild card and biggest consensus. God, I can't speak right now. The biggest probably wild card for anybody that probably has a say in that.
Yeah, no, and obviously, I'm intrigued to see how increased time playing with Luka and Kyrie could obviously, change how good he is on offense, and him being able to find those gaps with those guys drawing so much attention is going to be really interesting, because we obviously haven't got really a heavy dosage of seeing them together, barring just a few minutes here in preseason. So that's definitely something to monitor, I think, going forward as well. But yes, he's for sure, in my opinion, the biggest wild card. Obviously, it's not fair to place such drastic expectations on him, but fans are going to obviously get upset and get happy between the different moments with him. And I think just going forward, we have to understand that even if he is not ready to be the starting center, even if the Mavericks are kind of forced to make a trade maybe earlier than they'd like to, they may even try to opt to make a trade, even if Lively is doing decent. We'll see how that all transpires. But that's not to say that, if he does come in and he's not ready, that, he's bound to, not be the center of the future in Dallas. Like, he is a rookie at the end of the day, and he has been, like we said, tasked with a pretty hard position here. So, as long as he doesn't just totally bust it and, go Hashim Thabit mode, then we should be okay. But we'll obviously have to, see how everything plays out. But otherwise, I think our last wild card, and he's obviously had a pretty rough preseason, so I'm kind of hesitant to even put him there. But, I think he very well could develop a lot throughout the season. It does, kind of appear that his confidence is definitely rattled, being that it's his first time on the NBA stage. But that guy is Olivier Maxence Prosper. And I think that obviously if he can be, a wing that can come in and, defend, on all fronts. He's extremely switchable, has good strength. He's going to be able to do that, at the bare minimum. But his offensive game has, I wouldn't say completely left him, or maybe that is a good word, but it is not looked near as effective against NBA competition as it did against, summer league guys and what have you. Would be my main sort of takeaway. And, he hasn't been able to shoot well in preseason. His single dribble blow bys definitely, need to be diversified up a little, because he is a guy that kind of just, he's very aggressive, but, he doesn't really change up his approach in terms of how he's trying to attack the rim in one-on-one situations. It's a lot of just straight line drives, and, that stuff like that does pay dividends, when attacking off closeouts, but you do want to be able to get a little bit better of a handle. And even, in situations where he's got to the rim, he just looked kind of like generally unconfident sometimes. There have been some times where he's pump faked and just hesitated too much to go up. And, we obviously just want to see him have that same sort of aggressiveness that he does in summer league. But it's only been 3 preseason games, and, he had been impressing a lot over the summer up until that point. NBA scouts at the Rico Hines runs were, saying that they didn't even know this guy was a rookie. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff obviously coming out of, this summer and training camp that would point in the direction that, he'll end up turning this around at some point. But he's had a pretty rough start here, Jaren, to preseason, and I think it's kind of caught a lot of Mavericks fans off guard. Explain why he could still be a wild card this season.
Yeah, I mean, obviously his start to the season has been a little concerning. There was obviously high expectation for him. He hasn't really lived up to the expectation yet. But yeah, I mean, to speak on why he's so crucial for this season is because, again, I mean, he's adding depth to that 3 position, a position that is, very much in need in terms of the rotation that the Mavericks currently have. I mean, the only other true 3, I guess nobody's even like a true position nowadays, but the only other true 3 that I can really think of might be, Derek Jones Jr. That might be it. I as far as those two go, I mean, of course, Jones Jr. has played a lot better, but I think Maxence Prosper is definitely going to be the guy to hopefully lead the pack in that as the season goes. Or I don't know about hopefully lead the pack, but I'm hoping that he can take the lead in terms of that, because we just want to see him be successful. He was such a not highly coveted rookie, but I would say coming into camp, there was a lot of expectations, a lot of positive things that were being heard around the league, really, in his name, and I think that likely we'll see him turn it around. But again, this is kind of been a little bit concerning because it seems more of a confidence thing than a ability thing. We've seen him get around some defenders, not super effectively, but we've seen him get around some defenders. We've seen him get the open shots. He's just kind of looking hesitant when doing so. Even defensively, we have seen some pretty bare moments where he's just kind of ball watching, something that we never really got accustomed to watching with his time in the summer league or even in college. If you watched any tape, he was always a guy that was moving off ball. Even defensively, he was a guy that was moving off ball, trying to get the guy either with the ball or the sort of off ball cutter in an uncomfortable situation. He's always been really good at that. And we just haven't really seen that so far in his pro league debuts. But with that being said, I think that kind of lists him in that wild card spot because, it's the hype has certainly fell off, but we could very well see him sort of hone in and become the sort of NBA player that we all expected him to be. I don't know if he'll live up to a starting expectation like we saw in that first preseason game. I don't know if he'll ever live up to that again, at least this rookie season, of course. But, I think he's a guy that's pretty prominent and pretty important for this NBA season if the Mavericks want to make it far. And again, strictly for a depth reason, strictly for athleticism, defensive reason, I think that he's very important for this Mavericks success. I think once we get halfway through the season, it'll be intriguing to see what his 3-point numbers are, because again, he's going to be a guy that's working off ball. He can of course create on his own. We've seen that before, but I think more so systematic wise, seeing his 3-point numbers is going to be really important and really emblematic of, can this be something continuing forward, or is this guy, really just not meant for, or not, maybe not meant, but is he just not prepared for the NBA as much as we thought he was? So it'll be intriguing to watch moving forward. I think he's a lot. I'm pretty sure he's going to be playing in that final preseason game. I'm sure he'll get a lot of minutes. I think a lot of those sort of rotational line guys are going to get a lot of minutes, and I'm hoping he's one of them. But yeah, it'll be intriguing to see him play. And if it is just a confidence thing, or maybe he's just in a shooting slump, whatever it is. I mean, he's had 10 days to rest now, so we'll see what it looks like moving forward. But yeah, it's definitely, in my eyes, this is a wild card guy by definition.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like what you talked about defensively too, because that definitely sort of, sums up the preseason that he's having, from the perspective that it does kind of look like, some of it might be confidence related, just getting the jitters out. But, we are definitely just going to have to see going forward with him. I do think that, he obviously fits the mold of a player that would, be huge, a huge contributor to the Mavericks. And, it almost seems like there was a growing sense that, he'd be one of these guys, 3 games into the preseason, that we'd be talking more about in the, department of ceiling raisers and breakout guys potentially. Because, we did think that, hey, like this guy may have a chance to, make a run at the starting lineup, but it just doesn't seem like he may be ready for that. So we'll continue to track his development, obviously. But yeah, I mean, he, if he can insert himself into the rotation, I think at this point, I think that would be a win for his rookie season. If he can be a consistent rotation player, even if it's, just 10 to 15 minutes a game. But unless you have anything else for us here today, Jaren, that's going to be it from us. We will catch you guys after the preseason game in Detroit, probably going to take tomorrow off just because it's only a day out from that game. But then we'll be back with a couple more pods for the regular season, of course, as well, since there's definitely a decent gap in there. Stay plugged into our personal Twitters, of course, at Will Miljay, at Jaren Boslow. We're producing content all the time for the Smoking Cuban, and we are excited to announce that we are going to be starting a new venture with pro sports fans, doing some live stream content. We are also going to be doing some pregame shows, things of that nature. So you guys are going to be able to get to see our faces more, and we're going to be much more active on Twitter promoting that stuff, especially with the season about to kick off here. So we are really excited for all that opportunities and to sort of intertwine and connect, our fan bases on every respective platform. We don't really look at this like, we have all these different, separate deals that we're doing. We just look at it as, we're trying to get out as much Mavs content to you guys as possible. And that's what we pride ourselves on. So we appreciate you guys for listening this far in the podcast. If you've made it this far, like I said, check out our stuff on the Smoking Cuban. Of course, if you haven't, subscribe to our podcast on whatever listening platform you're listening on, make sure to do that. Whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any of that sort of stuff, turn on post notifications so you guys can get updated whenever we post an episode as well, and give us a review. If you really do enjoy our content, we would appreciate that. If you're listening on YouTube, we appreciate you listening there as well. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Comment down below. We didn't really get into them today because we didn't really have the time, and we kind of only wanted to do the main roster. But comment down below if there's any two-way guys that you think could potentially be a wild card for the Mavericks or insert themselves into the rotation to maybe actually change the course of direction of the Mavericks season or their rotation. So comment down below if you think there's any guys like that, if you listen this far. And otherwise, follow the podcast on Twitter at mainstream214. I don't really think there's anything else. You got anything else, Jaren?
Rangers play tonight. Let's hopefully take a 3-0 series lead. So
3-0 series lead. Rangers have not lost in the postseason yet. Are they 7-0 now?
7-0, yes. Hopefully going 8-0.
Hopefully going 8-0. So we're going to beat the Stros tonight, and we will catch you guys after the preseason game versus Detroit. See ya.
Bye.